Hey everyone, welcome back to this week's episode of Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast. This is the show all about farmers markets. Whether you're a new or experienced farmers market manager, farmer, or a food producer selling at farmers markets, this is the podcast for you. Hi, I'm one of your hosts, Brijet Myers. I have spent many years as an on-site farmers market manager, and I have done it all from pulling permits to social media marketing. And I also help coordinate Intense, the farmers market conference.
And I'm Cat White, also an active farmers market manager here in Southern California, director of San Diego markets, doing all the things market managers do, popping tents, hauling barricades, and curating farmers markets. And I'm the founder of the Farmers Market Pros, providing education and an annual conference for farmers market participants.
And welcome back to Tent Talk. Hey everyone, on today's episode of Tent Talk, we're tackling the awkward topic of difficult people at the market. Wasn't sure how to phrase that, but that's where we ended up.
Difficult's not such a harsh word.
No, difficult. Yeah. Challenging people.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we all deal with farmers and vendors and market managers, I suppose, that are more or less fun to work with. Over time, market participants usually get into their groove and everyone is one big family, right?
Yeah.
But I fight with my family sometimes.
Well, don't we all?
Don't we all? Maybe my moss. I call Kat my moss because she's my mom and my boss. And sometimes, mostly I love her.
Mm-hmm. And mostly I love you.
Yes. We've just been working together for so long that we have our groove. But,
we do.
You know, we see each other week after week, and with the farmers and vendors at the market and the staff, it's like you get into a groove. So not everything is great, but then you figure it out. You have a system and a routine.
You have a bad moment, but then, you all get together for Sunday dinner.
That's right.
It's all good.
That's right.
Yeah, so we're a family.
Yep.
But that's not who we're talking about today.
No. What we're talking about today is people who we don't specifically invite to the market. Also a nice way to say that. And who aren't always good guests. No, they are not. Luckily, they are by far the minority. Hopefully, that's true for your market as well. And most of our visitors are a very wonderful bunch. But we're going to discuss how we deal with the difficult guest. And by difficult guest, we mean various things.
A number of things.
A number of things.
A number of folks can be more or less difficult or challenging.
One challenge is the petition signature collectors.
Oh
my goodness. Although I will say that I have heard, and I talked to one market manager, at least that was at the conference last year, that invites petition signatures. They have like a booth.
Oh, a single booth.
Yeah, so sometimes
I've heard that.
And if
where
it's
you
like
put them in a box.
Yeah, put them in a box. And then if your values kind of align with what they're doing, okay, that's more or less like that is an invited guest, and they're collecting signatures for something maybe you like. We're talking more like the people that just show up and start talking to your shoppers while they're trying to buy their produce or while they're trying to safely cross the street, and they are getting in, a little aggressive or super annoying and, just are standing there all day and they're incessant.
I mean, at the very most basic level, they're distracting people from the farmers and the food makers that are paying your operation costs.
Exactly.
And that are expecting to make a living. Mm-hmm. That's why they're there. So any kind of distraction is rough. But yes, then you've got the really aggressive ones. And I mean, we've got that one guy that we had for ages who would come and actually set up a little like a card TV table, card table thing, and chairs right in the middle of the aisle.
Yeah.
It was
we had to tell him to move out of the aisle all the time, and then he'd be like right on the edge of the sidewalk where like technically we couldn't really, it's a tricky situation with the sidewalks, but it's hard to tell that sometimes they don't listen, or they'll get aggressive if you try to ask them and explain to them that people are trying to sell their goods here. This is how they make a living.
Well, and then sometimes they push back.
Yeah.
So I had a guy get into it with me on, I'm trying to make a living too. I get paid per signature. It's like, well, okay, but you didn't do anything in terms of applying and supplying me with insurance proof and all those good things that everybody else who's here to make a living has done.
Yeah,
so,
you're riding the market coattails, which is irritating.
And rude.
It's
just basically rude.
And I think, I try to show them some grace sometimes because they might not understand that, like, we go through a lot of time and effort and we have to pay for permits, and we paid for that barricade that's closing the street so that people can walk around that you're now talking to.
I think a lot of them don't understand.
They just don't get it.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
Still annoying.
And, sometimes they're collecting signatures for things that are really good causes.
Yeah, really important.
But they're still distracting from your farmers, and that's not cool. So,
exactly.
So that one's hard. Or how about the ones that are one step farther than that, and they're actually selling stuff. They're selling memberships, again, sometimes for good causes.
Yes.
Or what seems like a good cause until you have to chase 20 of them off that are right in front of your favorite farmer's booth, and the guy's trying to make a living selling zucchini, and they're kind of blocking people off or getting aggressive and rude with people. Then it's frustrating.
Or interrupting sales.
I will say that I almost printed T-shirts one year that said "Eat the whales," and I'm a big Greenpeace supporter. I'm a fan of the oceans, but boy, some of the folks that they had on their staff that year were just the worst. They were so rude and so aggressive and just relentless. If you tried to politely say, no, not interested, I'm doing my shopping, I've got my kids with me, they could be like really abusive.
Yeah. Oh, you don't like animals, shouting that at you. And when you're with your kids, like little kids are gonna be like, oh, Mom, you don't like tigers? Like that's not the environment we're going for. And it turns shoppers off from shopping at the farmer's market.
Well, it did. I mean, that was the problem with, I think it's Save the Children. I mean, who doesn't want to save the children?
Sure.
And it's an organization that's probably doing good work, but when they literally have 20 folks on the street in uniforms for that organization, people that don't want to be constantly confronted as they walk through will skirt around. They'll go down to the next block and walk around just to avoid having that confrontation over and over and over. And that means they're skirting the market.
Exactly.
So, just really not fair to the folks that are there selling their food, that have gone through the proper channels, that have applied for a permit and all that to be there.
Yeah, exactly. If you were shopping at a grocery store and like picking out your bread or your cereal and someone was standing next to you shouting at you about
in the aisle,
signing that, well, you were like literally trying to purchase things, would you keep shopping there? I know I would not.
Yeah.
I'd go shop online or whatever, anything to avoid that. So just when they do it at the farmer's market, they just think everyone's fair game because we're standing in the street, and they don't realize that we're doing commerce here. This is a business. This is a professional business.
Yeah, I've tried to explain that sometimes to them, that, when you're standing here, it's not like you're standing outside of Trader Joe's. It's like you're standing in the middle of the Trader Joe's aisle.
Exactly.
And that's not really cool.
Or like at a restaurant where people are sitting down,
Right.
Would you go in and stand right next to their table? Well, that's what you're doing when you're talking to people in line at the panini booth.
Yeah.
Like this is their restaurant. So, and I think that people just don't understand that difference, but it's something that market managers have to deal with and vendors themselves have to deal with.
Right. Yeah, we've had vendors that have been really frustrated because a particular petition signer or membership guy or protester or panhandler or what have you will decide that that's the best place to stand, and so they're right next to their booth week after week after week. We've had vendors consider leaving a market just because they couldn't detach themselves from one particular, what did we call them? Difficult guest.
Yes, difficult guest. Uninvited guest.
Uninvited guests, yeah.
Yeah.
That can be hard.
It can be really hard. The demonstrators, I think, we've had issues at our markets with demonstrators.
Just recently
we had a demonstration with really graphic photos of breast implants.
Yeah.
That had come out, and they were
actual breast implants.
Yes, and they were not edited. They were like
Not edited at all.
I had never seen anything like that in my life where I don't know who they were protesting.
Like if it was on YouTube, it would have had to have had that little thing that says, this could be triggering.
Yes.
Don't tune in here if you don't want to see it. But they were right there, right there on the sidewalk, in fact, set up in a planter.
Yeah, putting their signs in a planter 4 feet from our blueberry guy selling his blueberries. And I think a lot of people avoided that area all day because they didn't want to look at those signs. They didn't want the kids looking at the signs.
They didn't want to have to talk through it with their kids.
Exactly. Or it was triggering for some people who had maybe gone through an experience like that. I'm not sure who they were protesting at the farmer's market. If they were, go to like a plastic surgeon's office, I guess, which I don't think people should demonstrate in front of people's offices. But I don't know.
Sorry, plastic surgeons.
But I don't know who exactly they were trying to convince.
Yeah, I never could figure out like the call to action there.
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly what they were going for.
I didn't get it.
I think there was a donation request, but I'm not actually sure about that. It seemed more...
For whom?
And in their minds, I'm sure it was educational.
Yes.
That's part of the trick on this is that sometimes it's causes and things that you're actually really in favor of.
Yeah.
And it's great that they're out there on the street and, we're not going to make change in society unless we get out there and present issues to people.
Exactly.
But, like anybody else, any other NIMBY, I don't want them doing it in my market aisle.
Exactly. And people are buying food. And not to say like find the right time and place, but really, they're buying food. Like, please get those signs out of here. But,
it can be tricky. When we had the Women's March always comes right by the location of our downtown market.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you, I loved seeing the pink hats with the ears and the really, really clever, funny signs and stuff. That was awesome. But I know that we also had some customers and some vendors and farmers that were really offended by those ladies. So it's a tough call. We welcomed them in, and we were really happy because so many of them marched and then came and bought food. It was actually really good for the market. And I thought they were adorable. But every cause that's a good cause to somebody, by its nature, especially when it's political in any way, is going to be offensive to somebody else. And so it's a little bit tricky.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just, your values might not always align 100%, and probably most certainly do not with all of your farmers and vendors and all your shoppers and your customers and all the community. So it's tricky when you get to that kind of stuff.
Well, and that's why we don't host vendors in a booth we don't typically host informational promotional vendors at all, unless it's a really benign today's sponsor booth.
Yeah.
But we don't host political stuff. We don't host medical stuff. We don't. We just don't host those kind of things at the market for that reason. People should just be able to think about food.
Exactly.
Not that those aren't all important issues, but our shtick is making sure that farmers make us a living, that they get to sell to the public and make their farms more financially sustainable, and that we encourage entrepreneurship with the food makers. And that has to be our kind of narrow focus.
Exactly.
So we don't want to do anything that's going to be divisive or that's going to be setting people up in different camps where they argue about who's right.
Exactly.
They get to take off of that whole social experiment that we're going through now. They get to take time off from that when they're at the farmer's market and just shop for healthy food.
Exactly.
That's our deal.
And we have to really take it back to what's our mission statement and what's our purpose of having a farmer's market. It's so people have access to locally grown, locally made food. So really you have to cut out the rest of that noise. The rest of it's just noise. It just gets in the way of the purpose of your farmer's market. Yeah. So you might be a really big community activist, and considering your farmer's market is a good opportunity to reach people, and yes, it is. So you kind of have to weigh that against, does it get in the way of your true purpose, your number one purpose of having your farmer's market, which is probably
supporting your farmers.
The food
providing
access.
Healthy food access. Yeah.
Exactly. So, just kind of, there's free speech. That's a thing. And then, it's just kind of making that balance.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about we call them
other difficult guests?
Difficult guests. We call them pirate vendors. I don't know if we're the only ones that call them that, but pirate
Is that a technical term?
I don't know. I feel like it should be mainstream.
Is it jargon?
We say pirate 4:00, pirate on block 2. Vendors who set up without having applied to your market and feel as though it is a free-for-all, and there is a 4x4 space on the street.
And so they're going to wedge on
it.
in. Yeah. There's people out there, probably not people that listen to this podcast, but there's people out there that think that that's exactly the way farmers markets work.
Yeah.
I have people ask me, what do you mean you manage a farmer's market? What's to manage? Don't people just show up and sell stuff? No, not exactly.
That would be anarchy, thank you. Yeah, but just people, and especially when they're selling food, this really comes into it is your responsibility to make sure that people are not selling food to the public that have not been vetted by you and don't have correct permits.
Yeah.
As a market manager, that is your responsibility because...
Well, and risk management. So we have to make sure all of our vendors have insurance. And so if somebody's just randomly setting up a tent that someone's going to trip over, who's going to manage that situation later?
And if you're in a state that's not California and super duper highly regulated, even if there's not a regulation, really still you should take that seriously, that some vendor that just shows up for the day that you've never seen before, it's a risk that if you let them set up or if they set up and you don't do anything about it, because you don't know what they're selling to your customers at the market, and that'll reflect poorly on the market as a whole and on you. Yeah,
because it's going to look like you vetted them and curated them into your market the way you did any vendor that's there.
Exactly.
Do you remember the guy? We had a space that was empty because somebody had called out sick at the last minute. We didn't move the booths quite in time. It was a really prime corner spot.
Yes.
And so...
It was available for anyone.
It was available, yeah. So what it was instead was a wider walkway, and people should have gone on to that next vendor who should have been moved down to the corner, but that's neither here nor there. But I left the area for a few minutes. I came back. I was at the other end of the market. I walked up, and there was the most beautiful... The display was so pretty and so professional that it took me a minute to realize it wasn't actually one of our vendors. It was just somebody that apparently was carrying a very elaborate display around with him and saw a spot to set it up and did. And he was selling terrific photography, but I don't think he was actually selling photographs that were done. It was more of a... sign up to
business.
Like his business. Sign up to have your picture taken, which we don't usually host anyway. We sell products, but as a promotional item in that beautiful photography booth, he was giving out cookies. CBD cookies.
CBD cookies. I remember.
Totally unvetted.
Very unconnected.
It wasn't a good idea. Small children, it just wasn't good. So luckily, I think we caught him fairly quickly, explained to him, and he totally gave me the defense that he didn't know that that's not how the farmer's market worked. He thought you could just show up and set up and sell your stuff.
Sure.
I think that was bogus, but it's possible. He just didn't understand, but he did. We explained that to him, as you can probably imagine, and he did pack up and move along, but it's funny.
Yep, people just kind of make themselves at home.
Yeah.
Seems like an opportunity. I mean, good for them taking advantage of that opportunity.
Yeah, you gotta give them a little bit of props for, being a go-get-em kind of entrepreneur, but no.
Yeah.
That, I mean, sadly, you know what, because overall, part of the big problem is it's just not fair to the vendors that have had to, it's not a level playing field. The other vendors have had to spend the money to get their permits, and they've gone through the vetting process and all that. So it's kind of sad, but actually Girl Scout cookies sort of fall into this category because sometimes we'll have really aggressive. Generally, it's not the girls.
No.
Generally, it's really aggressive parents that show up and decide they're going to plop down a wagon full of Girl Scout cookies right next to a baker.
Exactly.
Who's made their cookies, who's gone through that process of getting a permit. And it's just not fair.
Kitchen. It's just not fair. And it's more... Usually if I try to explain that, like, hey, these people pay for their health permit annually. They paid to get into the market. They pay a booth fee. They have to pay for insurance. This is how they make their living to support their families. And if people buy your Girl Scout cookies, they're not going to have money left to buy this person's chocolate croissants or whatever other treat in that category. So can you please, not sell within the farmer's market? Find a different community
event. Go down
event
a block
and ask.
Even. Yeah, ask first.
And technically, as a former Girl Scout troop leader, they're not allowed to just set up wherever they want.
That's true.
You have to book it. So sometimes we say, oh, I'm going to write down your troop number and wink, wink.
That usually
get out
gets
of
their
here.
attention.
Yeah. So, and
usually they're nice.
Yeah.
Usually they start thinking about it. They don't realize that people pay to be there. They don't really connect the dots that those folks in those tents earn their living in those tents. They're supporting their families with what they make in those tents. And a lot of people don't entirely get that, I think.
No, and we have people come out in the Kind Bar people. We had Red Bull out one time, and mostly they're nice about it too once I explain it. They're just like employees that are out there that were just hired to go be promotional people, and they hand out little samples. And I just say, if you hand out samples, people aren't hungry enough to buy the food from the people here trying to make a living. Does that make sense? I just try to say very nicely, is that making sense to you that these people paid us to be here and you're walking through here for free, giving out free food?
Handing out granola bars in front of the guy that's selling a locally made bar that he's earning a living with.
I asked them on Saturday, or a couple Saturdays ago, the Kind Bar crew was back, and I said, would you walk into that restaurant and start handing out Kind Bars to people sitting down at that restaurant? And she said, no. And I go, well, that's what you're doing. These people are our restaurant guests. Or would you walk into a grocery store and just start handing it to people? You're inside a grocery store right now. Please don't hand stuff out for free. Here's our contact information if you want to pay for a sponsorship.
Yeah, right.
Which, fine line with the Kind Bars. But, and usually, sometimes they'll say, well, you can't tell me what to do. It's a public street. But mostly, they're fine.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the case with pretty much everybody we deal with that's a difficult guest is if you're nice about it, if you're courteous, if you recognize that they probably don't understand the whole picture, and you ask them and you explain to them why you're asking them to move down to the next block.
Yeah.
Or, do this at a different time. Generally speaking, that's the best way to get results when you're dealing with it.
Exactly.
Recognizing whoever you're dealing with as a person is important. And that comes into play a lot, actually, when you've got people, especially if you're in an urban farmer's market. A lot of times we're dealing with people who are transient or are homeless and who may be homeless with mental illness.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that can be really tricky.
Yeah, I find it difficult at our Little Italy market. It's a big market. There's a big homeless population in San Diego in general, and then especially downtown, which kind of Little Italy is a part of downtown. So we just have had a lot of different instances with just people that are just hungry, or they're lost, or they don't have a place to go. So it's they just kind of end up at the market. Sometimes they're aggressive. sometimes you can kind of tell by looking that like they hang out in this neighborhood, and then on Saturdays there's so many people on the street that it's kind of freaking them out.
Yeah, it's disorienting for them because that's really their spot, and we've moved into their spot, sort of.
Yeah, so we're there and they don't know what to do, and the crowds make them anxious, so maybe then they act out on that. There are certain times when we do have to call the police or even the non-emergency police and just say, hey, this guy, he looks like he might harm himself, or he's standing in the way of people crossing the street safely, and it's a busy day, so we really need some help here. And San Diego does a decent job of coming out and kind of addressing the issue with them. But it's just really case by case. You don't know what those people are going through, but sometimes they kind of like interfere with the business of people selling business, doing their business at the market. So if this like homeless gentleman is standing right in front of a booth, customers are probably not coming up to the booth.
Right.
So, you have to take that into consideration. It is your kind of responsibility to try to figure that situation out at the market.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But again, a lot of times it's remembering that there are people too, that there's homeless citizens. Mm-hmm. Are still people dealing with all of their own issues, just like each of us are.
Yep.
And that you have to meet them where they are and show respect and compassion, but then still address the effect that they're having on the market.
Exactly.
And some of our vendors are really good at doing that.
Some of our vendors are great, and they kind of make relationships with them. And there's some vendors that say, hey, I give this guy a couple oranges in the morning and tell him, hey, go hang out, by the boats over there until the market's over, because I know the crowds freak you out. But here's a little snack while you go do it. And then they go hang out somewhere else, so they're not really like afflicted by the market during market hours. And then we have a really great vendor, Tamra. She sells like really beautiful woven baskets and seed salts. She's been a vendor for a long time. She has a really great outgoing personality. And we had a transient woman who would kind of hang out at the market, and she would talk to herself really loudly about, she was kind of a paranoid, like maybe a little schizophrenic, and she wouldn't get like aggressive, but she'd start shouting, and it was kind of, people would get curious what she was doing. She'd stand in the way of people crossing the street, things like that. So Tamara said, what are we going to do? And I'm like, honestly, I don't know what to do. She's like, I'm just going to go talk to her. So she went over and she said, hey girl, how are you doing today? And she said, and I was like, oh man, what's going to happen? And the woman was like, oh, hey. And it took a while to warm up. And Tamara was like, well, tell me about you. Like, where do you live? Like, how long you've been in San Diego, what are you doing here, that kind of stuff. And they've gotten to conversation, and the woman told Tamara, I just don't want to take my medication. It makes me feel sick. I don't like it. Like, they said I should take my meds, but it makes me feel like, doesn't make me feel so great. And so Tamara was like, oh, I know how that feels, like really sympathetic with her, and just kind of was like, hey, like, I'm a person, you're a person. We're both here. Like, I'm trying to do business. You're trying to hang out. What do we do? Well, how about you go sit over here for a little bit? Or, hey, here's a quiet spot for you to hang out. And it's just, they just ended up having like a little friendship.
That's great.
And she helped her feel better, I think. So it's just, sometimes that doesn't always work, reaching out to people like that. But, if you feel the need to try, it can help. So just finding different ways to help with those.
Yeah, because there's we've got a limited number of ways that we can handle these things, folks. Face it. So some of it's free speech issues when you're getting into the petitioners and the protesters and that kind of thing. You don't, in a lot of cases, actually have a legal right to take them out of the market, suggest strongly that they leave the market.
You're in a public space.
Yeah. So, the best we can do a lot of times is just explain to them why it's a problem, what kind of effect they're having on people that are trying to earn a living. And most of them, I find, if you go through that process, if you take the time to explain to them why you're asking them to move, or to at least move out of the way and move to the edge of the aisles, that kind of thing, most of them are pretty responsive. Yeah. Every once in a while, not. You just get somebody that's
their personality.
That's their personality.
No matter what you're saying to them.
They're a difficult guest in life.
A difficult guest in the party of life.
That's right. And maybe that's just how they are. So, sometimes it's just...
You never know.
Resigning ourselves to the idea that we work in an urban environment and we have to deal with all parts of the community. And, maybe congratulating ourselves a little bit for creating such inviting spaces that everyone wants to be there.
That's what I just say. You know what? I'm flattered that you want to come to our market that we work so hard to put together. You want to be here. And you're standing out here all day in the sun because my market's so great.
That's right. Sometimes that's just the only way to deal with it.
That's right. Yeah.
So, it's part of the job. What do you say, Brijet? What's that matching tattoo we're all going to get?
Our job is weird.
Our job is weird. Hashtag, our job is weird.
Our job is very weird. These are the things we do. We will say, what do you do as a market manager? I'm like, sit down. It's a long story.
We're going to do an episode like that.
Yeah.
You can just talk into a microphone all day as you explain what a day in the life of a market manager looks like.
A day in the life. I feel like that'd be fun. And I'd actually be interested if a vendor did that as well. So I might ask one of our vendors, hey, do a day in the life of a vendor.
And a farmer.
And a farmer.
Our farmers. Ooh, that day
waking up early.
2 a.m. Picking those veggies.
Exactly. Yeah.
That'd be good.
No, it's
all right.
great.
Well, this has been fun. If you have ideas out there or stories you want to share or, venting you want to do about how you deal with difficult guests, and if you have creative ways of managing that, we'd love to hear from you. There's lots of ways to find us.
Yeah. Farmers Market Pros on Instagram. Email connect@farmersmarketpros.
Facebook. We always forget about Facebook. If you're still on Facebook, we're still there too. Intense, the Farmers Market Pros.
Mm-hmm. Don't call us because we don't like the phone.
Yeah, don't use the phone. But email us or comment on our social media and tell us what you do when you encounter a difficult guest.
Let's share our knowledge.
Yeah,
that's why we're here.
There's a lot of creative ways. I was impressed by Tamara, just finding the common points and having some empathy and talking to people. Sometimes people that are different than us, we forget that they're also the same as us in a lot of ways. And if we just reach out, we can make a connection.
Exactly. All right. It's a good topic.
Good topic.
I like it. All right. We'll see you guys next time. Hey, thanks so much for listening today. Please leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you find this podcast, and tell us how you liked today's episode. And be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss the next one. And if you want more farmers market tips, tricks, and information, you can subscribe to our weekly newsletter at farmersmarketpros.com and follow us on Instagram at farmersmarketpros. Watch for upcoming Farmers Market Pros events, both live and online, and take advantage of early bird tickets for the 2020 Intense the Farmers Market Conference right now. Regular price for the 3-day conference is $355, and early bird price is $235. So you save over $100 by planning ahead and getting your ticket right now. Three's Company tickets are an even better deal, so bring a couple friends, and we are looking forward to seeing all of you there. This podcast is produced by the Farmers Market Pros, where passion meets profit. Today's episode was recorded by Adam Samaha and edited by Justine Marzoni Mead. Original music by David Mead.